creativity isn't something that you do, it's something that you are. And once people kind of embrace this identity, I'm an artist, I'm an innovator. And again, you could be at any box in the org chart, you could be in finance, you could be in legal, you could still be an innovator. Once people get into that, you need less tools and frameworks because it becomes natural. But as people are getting going and they're fighting the gravitational force that we've all been trained by, which is keep your head down, don't ever make any mistakes, failure isn't an option, there's only one right answer, all that nonsense, once that gets cleared away, you need fewer structures to keep it moving.
With all of your success, why do you keep doing this? Why are you pushing for this in the world? I mean, that was like sort of a big question of mine as I was thinking about this, getting ready for the talk.
Well, thanks, man. And I bet we share this philosophy, but if you're doing a vocation as a means to an end, you're laying bricks so you can feed your family, which by the way is awesome and respectable. Let's not be critical of that. But if you're doing something you don't like and you're getting no intrinsic value, as soon as you don't need to do it anymore, you stop, you retire. On the other end of that spectrum, if you're doing something that you love, that fills your heart, that you feel like is your calling to create value in the world, to contribute to others, to lift people up, and you're getting deep personal satisfaction out of doing it, you never want to stop. And so it isn't about like reaching a certain number in your bank account. It's part of your life's work and your calling and your challenge. So I don't look at retirement quite the same way. And I understand I'm very lucky to do that. I'm not being glib about that, but I keep pushing because I love it and that's who I am. And I don't think I'll stop. The idea of like retiring just doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah, retiring has never made sense to me either. I think getting to a place where you don't have to worry about money to sustain the lifestyle that you want, that's really what it is. It's stopping and just sitting back and watching TV. I mean, you're going to probably check out a lot faster that way. So I think we all have to have something to do. So totally agree there. I'll never retire, and I don't have to worry about resources for the next couple hundred years. I mean, I'm good too, and I keep working as well. I read Big Little Breakthroughs, your latest book, getting ready for this discussion. And what jumps out at me is like, this is such a big idea. It's right in front of all of us. And yet the vast majority of companies miss it. Why do you think that is? Well, first set it up. What do you mean by Big Little Breakthroughs? And then why do you think so many miss this giant opportunity?
Yeah, so the book, Big Little Breakthroughs, How Small Everyday Innovations Drive Oversized Results, was really a passion project. I set out on this weird mission to understand how do the most innovative leaders think and act. And I spent over 1,000 hours on the project. I interviewed CEOs, billionaires, celebrity entrepreneurs, Grammy Award-winning musicians. And I tried to understand, like decode, what do they do every day? And it was striking how wrong I had it. You think of innovators as those that swing for the fences with every pitch. They take these wild, high-risk moonshots. The truth is the best innovative leaders do the opposite. They cultivate small daily acts of innovation, micro innovations. I call them big little breakthroughs. And it's actually a much more pragmatic approach. It can be done by everybody on an org chart. It's not only the CEO. It's less risky. It's more accessible. And you start to build skills in the little stuff that ultimately add up to the big things. So to me, it's actually a very refreshing and liberating way to think about innovation. It doesn't have some minimum threshold of $1 billion to count. Little baby innovations count just as much, especially when they stack over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Incredible. So I just started my 8th company from scratch. And one business I sold in 2016, we had about 500 team members. It was aerospace related. We repaired stuff for helicopter and fixed wing operators around the world. But every single team member, all 500, didn't matter where they were in the business, would document every month their ideas to measurably improve the value that we created as a company. And it was, cash flow or profit or customer experience, internal or external. And I guess I'm just sort of backing up what you're saying. Oh my gosh, it was so incredible what we were able to do around that.
Yeah, I think if a leader has a company, regardless of the size, and only a few people are the innovators, they're missing a very important natural resource, which is tapping into the hearts and minds of every team member. And I really believe that innovation should be an everyday business, and it's about like helping everyday people become everyday innovators. And when you do that, you unlock just such an incredible, powerful source of growth, of competitive advantage, of financial performance, and ultimately of impact. So I think it's kind of like leadership job number one is to help nurture the creativity and inventive thinking of every team member, regardless of role or position.
Yeah. And it's, I think, easy to say. It's super hard to do. Like, where do you even start to create a culture like that inside a business?
Yeah, it's sort of hard to do without a map. Just getting from here to visit you in Phoenix from Detroit. If I had no map, that'd be really hard. But if I was using Google Maps, it would be less hard. And I think that's the same. It can seem overwhelming because the topic of human creativity feels rather squishy. But and that's what I tried to cover in the book. That there really is a systematic way to cultivate those skills and to create the right conditions for it to blossom naturally. If I were to answer your question in a nutshell, for leaders, it's creating the right rituals and rewards that supports the desired outcome. And one example is there's a guy I wrote about in the book who every Friday he has a thing called F Up Fridays. He says the whole word. I just be polite for now, but F Up Fridays, he gathers the entire company one by one. Each person has to stand up and proudly share what they effed up that week and what they learned from it. And eventually they get to someone that didn't F something up that week, and everyone was like, well, why not? What are you going to try next week? And if you think about the message that this simple zero cost ritual sends to everybody in the company, that innovation is part of everybody's job, that we're going to support you even when you stumble, that we understand that if we want to be innovative, we're going to have to tolerate some setbacks, and we're okay with that. And we want you to be curious and trying new things. And so again, whether a leader embraces that one particularly or something like it, I think the more we can create rituals and rewards around the desired outcomes, the more we will see them.
Yeah. And it still kind of goes back to like where and how do you start? So I like the initial piece of just being intentional. We want a culture of creativity, innovation, and all of that. So, okay, we want it. So where would we actually start? And you think just a couple of rituals around that could be the way to do it?
Yeah. Another fun way to start, because back to, as you might imagine, the book is around small innovations. So the idea, start small, don't start big. You might try a new technique in one meeting. You might give people an innovation challenge for 1 week. Like, hey, come up with the coolest idea and you get a $20 Starbucks card. Like, it doesn't have to be a giant thing. It doesn't have to be an act of Congress. But one thing that's, if someone wanted something a little more systematic, I have a 5% challenge that I've issued to people and companies around the world. So if you take 40 hours a week of work, 5% of that is 2 hours a week. And so if you were to take a 5% challenge for only 30 days, not years and years, just 30 days, a finite time frame, and instead of spending all 40 hours being heads down, which is cranking out your to-do list and your deliverables and such, just take 5% of that time, 2 hours a week, to be heads up. And heads up time is exploring and noticing things around you, or doodling, or trying something new, or tinkering with new ideas, or experimenting. And it's not as outcome focused, but it is directed toward a particular desired approach. And here's what I've done. So I've issued this challenge. People have begrudgingly taken it. And the first thing I hear back is that zero productivity was lost. Magically, 40 hours gets smushed into 38 hours. No one misses a beat. Next thing I hear back is the first week is really awkward and uncomfortable. People are like looking around. Oh my gosh, is someone going to see me being creative? It's like they're cheating on their spouse or something, like they're going to get caught. So because we're so ingrained to be like outcome focused, having a little time where we're heads up instead of heads down feels uncomfortable. But by the end of that 30-day period, like clockwork, I hear that it is the most productive time they've spent in years. And it's not only productive for the company, it's intrinsically rewarding. There are few things in life as rewarding as the expression of human creativity. So that's sort of a low bar approach. Try it for 30 days, 2 hours a week, see what happens. And again, you're not going to miss any productivity. No deadlines will get blown, but you might unlock something that's pretty special that can sustain after that 30-day period expires.
Yeah, I love that. And you can even pick a target. So I've got an example that kind of follows what you're talking about, where I challenge the operational folks in the aerospace business to uncover 20% capacity and figure out a way to do the same amount of work, 20% less time. That would have been 140,000 hours of uncovered capacity in 1 year. And they uncovered more than that. It was 200,000 hours. That was 100 people we didn't have to hire. We still hired because we were growing faster. So bigger bonuses, raises, job security, things coming through. So setting a target can be super valuable too, right?
I love that. And I love it on so many levels. Setting a target, to your point, directing creativity toward a desired outcome. Yes. The other thing is that often people think of innovation only as product or marketing innovation, writing code or inventing some new marketing campaign. In your example, you directed people's creativity toward creating more time, to doing their job more efficiently. So it was an internal process improvement. It wasn't a product, and it wasn't a new product. And I love that because the principles that we're talking about can be applied to product or marketing, but they can be applied to really a whole much wider array of business activities. Essentially, any dimension of business can benefit from a little dose of creativity. And I love that you did that. You directed your folks at in improving time, and you unlocked 200,000 hours. I mean, what if you didn't ask that question? I mean, that's such a powerful example.
Yeah. And I think any organization can find a target and get everybody around it. And I think they want to participate in that. I mean, the self-esteem rises. They all start acting like CEOs of their own role. In the book, you differentiate between, creativity and innovation. So creativity, it landed on me as, well, here's all these ideas. I'm creative. It kind of flows these different ways. But innovation is something that has utility, like you can apply it to create value going forward. Talk about that a little bit, the distinction.
Yeah, we often use these words interchangeably. And to me, creativity is something that's novel. You're inventing something that didn't exist before. If I started doodling on a piece of paper and I wasn't drawing by the numbers, that would be creative. Now the question is how creative, how good is it? Mine's very different than a talented artist because I can barely draw a stick figure. But if there's something new that has some intrinsic creative value, artistic value, I'd call that creativity. But no one's going to buy that. It didn't make the world any better. There's no utility value. On the other hand, if I created a new system to help people to learn to draw better and I could monetize that by selling a course online, then it would be crossed into this realm of innovation. So I think of innovation as a subset of creativity. If creativity is new ideas that may have some artistic value, innovation is a subset of it, which is creative ideas that have some utility value.
Okay. And when you talk about the art of refinement, that's kind of a cultural way of being as well, right? Like to continue that, to be in that state.
Yeah, it's exactly right. People often misunderstand big creative breakthroughs as a single moment in time, like that lightning bolt. I mean, we even have like the light bulb moment that we think of, these aha moments. And often an initial idea is important, but that's not really where the art or the value comes from. The art and the value comes from taking that initial idea and refining it a lot. So we are often thinking about some, talented genius level person, and they're in the shower, they have this eureka moment, and then they come out and it's perfected before they dry off. That's rarely what happens. You and I are both musicians, and in songwriting, you might have an initial idea for a song that initial idea is 5 minutes, but you might refine that song for 2 years before releasing it to the world. So it takes some of the burden off for us if we don't have to think that our idea from day one has to be the Mona Lisa. But you come up with an idea, and then it's a series of tweaks and refinements and edits and adjustments. And, over time, you sort of polish it off and get to something good. One of my favorite quotes is the one thing that all good authors have in common is lousy first drafts, which I can tell you as an author is true, but also very funny because we think just sit down and pen the great American novel. But from Hemingway to Malcolm Gladwell and everywhere in between, you come up with an idea, but it's a series of refinements and adjustments over time that elevates the integrity of that piece.
Yeah. And I can really relate, well, on so many levels, but on the music side of it. So we're in the studio right now recording for an album, and now we're layering in guitar solos and guitar melodies and all that. So I've got my home music studio and I'm doing the work here. It can take me 5 or 6 hours to refine a 45-second to 60-second solo to get it exactly the way I want. And it usually starts out not that great, but the process just works as you go through it. And at the same time, I live for improv because amazing things happen when you just go for it, right? Sometimes, not all the time. But the refinement is everything. And you talk about the initial idea for a startup almost never is the thing that made them create a ton of value. Talk about why that's the case, because I think a lot miss that too.
Yeah, I think any type of work, value creation work on the surface looks like it was a snap of the finger, but often it's that, again, the iterative process that you kind of refine it and ultimately get to the right point. I've invested in over 100 startups over the years, and I can't think of one of them that materialized exactly the way we expected. Usually what happens is you have some idea and it might be directionally interesting or you're going after a particular problem, but until you get in it, and by the way, the world's changing around you too. You have to make adjustments to external factors. Until you're in the middle of it, you don't necessarily know what's right or wrong. And so you might have a good thesis, but then, as you go after it, you're constantly tweaking and adjusting and course correcting and using agility to find your way as you go. And that's true for music, it's true for art, and it's absolutely true for business. That rarely an initial idea is the one that ultimately manifests. It's the idea that leads to the idea that tweaks to something else that bounces over here. And that one is the killer idea that really crushes it. And I've seen this time and time again. Investments that I've made, initial idea goes, it's about to die. They're running out of money. They're going to miss payroll. We give it a little bit of lifeline. They try something else. After 2 or 3 months, that's about to die. We think it's hopeless. The whole thing's over. We're idiots forever investing. And then they tweak to one other thing and boom, it takes off, And so sometimes, again, it's the idea that leads to the idea that we shouldn't be so dismissive of. We should kind of let that emerge and adjust. And ultimately, that's where value is created.
Yeah, I've lived and watched what you just said so many times. I actually get to laugh, and it's okay. Going through it. Although I think there's a lot that don't understand that process. And that may be why over 90% of startups fail. They just don't do that. What's your advice on getting their head around that in the right way? Because you can say it. And what it seems to me, when I go to startup groups and all they want to ask is, what can I put in my PowerPoint deck to make you give me money? It's like they're in it for the money, not for the value to be created. I think that's the difference. But what's your experience there?
Well, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I think anytime you see something that's a finished piece of work, you rarely realize all the work that went into it. If you go to New York City and watch a Broadway play, you see Hamilton, for example, it looks like they just woke up that morning and invented this on the fly. Like they're just in it and they're having fun and they've just thought of these songs. You don't realize that the years of study and practice and discipline that got them to that point. Anytime something looks easy, it's because there was a lot of work behind it to make it look easy. And so, but we don't often see that from the outside. The thing you talk about going after money, my experience is that those that chase purely economic gains rarely find it. Whereas those that chase something of importance, greatness, impact, value creation, money comes as a byproduct. And so it's funny, if you're just going after the money, you rarely get it. But if you go after impact and greatness and contribution and generosity and such, you actually end up with more money too. Like it's a double win, but it's counterintuitive. And so when I see entrepreneurs that are passionate about solving a customer problem or making the world a better place, again, the money will come as a byproduct versus just chasing that as the thing.
Yeah. When I think about creating value, it's always holistic. And I've been working on this for a few decades now and cultivating it. So the material piece everybody gets, most focused there, even those that say it can't be about the money and that's not what's most important. When you look at their actions, it's actually what they're saying is what's most important. But on the emotional energy side, I've always thought of it as a superpower for leadership. And then the spiritual side, it's connectedness. Like, what are we doing to strengthen the team that we have and the communities that we engage with around the world? And doing those other two buckets well for me, the aerospace business, we got a 21.6x multiple of EBITDA when we sold it. Very profitable, nice $100 million business. And we never would have gotten that if we only focused on the material value creation, which is wildly important, by the way, but the other two supercharge. That's how I think about it. And I think about it intentionally in those three. What's your advice for getting people to, I guess, focus on it in a more holistic or better way? Because I like what you're saying.
Yeah. I think if you start zooming out, how can I make more money? And to answer a different question, how can I create the most impact? How can I serve others? How can I make the world better? And I'm not even just saying that you should only be altruistic. Nothing wrong with economic gain. You and I benefited from that. Awesome. But I don't think that's where you start, because that in and of itself, just turning dollars actually doesn't create value. Creating value in the world is by serving, helping others, creating impact, etc. And I feel like when you create actual value, you are rewarded economically for doing so. So I think you start by asking a different question. In Silicon Valley, people often say, fall in love with the problem, not the solution, which essentially means, figure out who your customer really is, your ideal customer profile, and what are they really suffering with? What's the biggest problem that they have that you want to try to attack? And in that case, then once you fall in love with the problem, you're putting your own needs secondary. You're even putting the manner in which you solve the problem secondary, because you care mostly about solving it. And then you remain fluid and agile. You're willing to adjust and making refinements, solving the problem in different ways, but you're not overly committed to a particular thing. So you don't say like, I'm in the business of X. It's more like I'm in the business of solving this particular problem. And that's where I've seen people really, really shine.
And that could be the best, simplest filter. Are you involved? Are you serious about solving the problem, or are you just here to make money? And I think a lot of startups, they're just in how do I make a bunch of money mode, not passionate for solving the actual problem. I don't even know what the right percentage ratio would be, but I bet it's less than 10% are passionate about solving the problem, and the rest of them are all about how can we make a bunch of money.
It's funny because you said earlier that 90% of people fail, and you just said, 90% of people don't think about the problem they're solving. Maybe there's a correlation there.
I think there really is. When it comes to creativity, so we're both musicians, and it's interesting. The older I get, and I think I'm probably at least 10 years older than you, my connectedness to the source, whatever that is, it just flows. Like, oh my gosh, almost every single day it goes through. But a lot of folks, they just don't think they're creative, and you talk about this in the book. So how should, because we're all creative, it's all there. You just have to have access to it. What's your advice for getting people to think about being, creating scenarios where they're just more open to it? And then how do you cultivate it?
Yeah, awesome question. I love that you said you're really connected to source. However people think about that, I'm not proselytizing any religion. Some people say God, universe, source, whatever, your own internal instincts. But, letting music, for example, flow through you instead of trying to force it, always yields better music, in my opinion. And I think the same is true in business. If you're trying to force it and inject yourself and you're clenching your fists on it, it's not usually as effective as if you sort of let things kind of flow. And there's actually a term called flow, which is there was a very famous scientist in Chicago that came up with that, which is essentially the embodiment of perhaps a higher source, but at least however you look at it, at least your intuition, which is you're not fighting so much, you're flowing into it. In terms of people, how do you get into that state? The biggest blocker of creative output is not natural talent. In fact, I've been researching human creativity now for several decades. The research is crystal clear that all of us, and I mean all of us, are hardwired to be creative. That's our natural state. You don't have to start a business to be creative. You don't have to play guitar to be creative, but we can all find creativity in our own ways, but we all have the capacity to do so. The biggest blocker isn't natural talent, it's fear. So fear is that poisonous force that robs us of our best thinking. That's what blocks the flow. And so simply put, fear and creativity cannot coexist. So the nice thing is, because creativity and flow kind of are natural to who we are as human beings, it's not like you have to learn something brand new. It's more like you have to remove the blocker. And if that blocker is fear, we need to create safe conditions where the creativity can flow naturally. Got to send that judgmental brain out to Starbucks and let the creativity flow. So whether it's you in a notepad, no one judging you, or you're on a walk, or whether it's you're in a team environment where all ideas are celebrated, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if we create psychological safety, creativity will start to blossom naturally.
That's really amazing advice. For me, I think a lot about just being more present. Like the more present I am, the more I've got that channel open. And I love the music metaphor. And when I think about teams, because we don't typically create value in a vacuum by ourselves, right? There's others that are involved with it. And you have bands like, pick a band, Beatles, Eagles. Change one ingredient, one team member, and everything changes. The vibe, how they write songs, all of it. It's exactly the same in business, that you change one team member and everything else can change. So what's the difference? I don't think there's a difference when it comes to creating value, whether it's emotional energy value through music, which is incredible. And if you get it right, you can uplift 1 billion people on the planet. Or you've got a product at any level inside an organization. It's your band, your value creation band. With that, talk about that when you work with teams, because that's how I see it. Where do you see that?
Yeah, one thing, you mentioned like the Beatles, and you think about a Paul McCartney or John Lennon, who are these incredible once in a generation geniuses. The good news is that you don't have to have a Paul McCartney on your team to be creative. What you need is the right conditions, and then again, creativity can blossom. People often ask me, like, how do you recruit for creative people? I said, just hire for people. It's in other words, it's not that people are creative or they're not. They all are, in my opinion. Some people need to develop those skills more. So it's like building muscle mass. You have to build some creative muscle mass. And again, if you put the right conditions in place and the right systems, creativity will flourish. Back to the music analogy, which I fear you and I will beat to death, but we can't help it because we're musicians. The band Aerosmith does something cool. So they're a band, of course, but they're also a business. And like business people, they have meetings. And they have, on a pretty regular basis, a meeting called the Dare to Suck meeting. And the dare to suck meeting is that you have to show up with ideas that probably suck. In other words, you're pushing your creative boundaries so far, it's probably going to be terrible. And the lead singer, Steven Tyler, says, most of them do suck. But then 1 out of 100, you get Do Look Like a Lady or Love in an Elevator, and those have become their most prolific work. And so in that case, they were talented, but we're all talented. We all have creative capacity. But in that case, they put a structure in place. That little structure of that meeting unlocked a new level of creativity. And then once again, you don't need to have Steven Tyler or Paul McCartney on your team. If we have humans on our team that are carrying and we put the right conditions and structure in place, that creativity will happen naturally.
And that could be any team inside an organization. I believe philosophically the top leader or CEO's job is to continually increase the value of the business responsibly over time. So by proxy, the senior leadership team. So you could take your example and say, everybody come next month to this meeting, or we have this monthly session. What's one thing that would increase the value by 10% faster than we are planning for? And you go through the ideas, and maybe 9 of them are terrible, but one of them is pretty good. It's one of those winning songs, right?
That's exactly right. And anytime where you can remove people's personal responsibility for ideas, the better. In other words, when we do a brainstorm session, when we share an idea, we're sort of judged on that idea. If I share an idea that's no good and my boss yells at me, I feel bad. So people tend to share their safe ideas and withhold their more half-baked or even bolder ideas. So I was building my own company. I think you'll like this. I wanted to make sure that we maintained a high level of urgency and creativity. And I realized that our own kind of biases or political stuff would get in the way. So I launched a company that was a fake competitor. I realized that often greatness is achieved in the face of adversity. And at that time, we were kind of the category leader. So I told everybody at a company meeting, there's a firm out there that's faster than us, bigger, more profitable, better innovation, better investors. They're called the Slither Corporation. And it was a laugh, but everyone knew that Slither was our fictitious nemesis, the made up bad guys. But after that, we use it as a technique. So I would say, for example, before Slither, I might say, hey, we need to shave 2 days out of our production time. How should we do it? After Slither, I'd ask the question differently. I'd say something like this. Our spies at Slither just got a report that they shaved 2 days out of their cycle time. How do you think they did it over at Slither? And it's the same question with a little adjustment, but now I'm just speculating what do they do over at Slither. I'm not responsible for the idea. So someone who would only share something that's really bulletproof because they're afraid of being looked at as foolish, they might come up with 30 ideas. Here's what they did at Slither, because they're not personally responsible for the idea. I would say things like, what's one thing your counterpart at Slither might be doing differently than you? And so what happened was this fake nemesis, where we had t-shirts made and it became part of our culture, was a really powerful mechanism to unlock people's creativity because it removed them of the judgment that is ordinarily associated with fresh thinking.
Oh, wow. And it keeps them from being on that metaphorical firing squad line or whatever.
Totally.
Coming in. I love that. Okay, I'm assuming you can get the cultures to a point where they just value that value creation jamming, where we just come in, we go for it. We know it's going to suck, but we value the iterative process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so now, as people start to become more comfortable with it, ultimately, in my opinion, creativity isn't something that you do. It's something that you are. And once people kind of embrace this identity, I'm an artist, I'm an innovator. And again, you could be in any box in the org chart. You could be in finance, you could be in legal, you could still be an innovator. Once people get into that, you need less tools and frameworks because it becomes natural. But as people are getting going and they're fighting the gravitational force that we've all been trained by, which is keep your head down, don't ever make any mistakes. Failure isn't an option. There's only one right answer. All that nonsense. Once that gets cleared away, you need fewer structures to keep it moving.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. To be able to evolve into not having to worry about walking on eggshells or bringing bad ideas because we're all going in the same direction is great. One of the concepts in the book about, doing more with less, you probably don't know this, but before he passed, one of my partners, a 10% owner in my business, was Jack Welch. And I remember he and I talking about this concept. And when he was running General Electric, he said, I didn't have, his words, half the resources I wanted to be able to do the things I wanted to do. And so when people tell me, when we get these resources, all things will be solved, I'm like, nope, never goes away. So talk about that a little bit. We'll never have everything we need, but how can you get more done with less? And yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, even with a big company like General Electric, to your point, on a given project, day by day team effort, there's never enough money or time or resource. You always crave more of that. But actually being resource constrained counterintuitively can unlock better answers. I always like to joke because people say, oh, I want to be more innovative, but I don't have enough resources. And I would say, like, if the amount of external resources you had equaled your level of creativity, the federal government would be the most creative organization on the planet. And I don't think anyone would accuse them of being that. And startups have very few resources and they're very creative. So what I think the trick here is that instead of looking for external resources, you look inward. And it's around being sort of scrappy and resourceful and using inventive thinking and sort of figuring out fresh ways. Another music thing, when I was learning to play, when I was in college, I had a professor that would force me to remove strings from the guitar. So I would have to take off up to 3 strings at a time. So you imagine, okay, your resources are cut in half. It's going to mess up your creativity. And at first it was a little uncomfortable. But once that happened, I could no longer rely on the patterns that I knew. I was forced to solve musical problems in a fresh way. So actually, oddly enough, my creativity accelerated rather than declined, even though I had fewer resources. And in a business setting, I've done this multiple times. I'm with some senior board of directors at a giant company, and they're stuck on some problem. And one of my favorite ways to break the logjam is I say, imagine that you had half the time and half the resources. And after people kind of giggle a little bit, they go, here's exactly what we do. And it's very funny. Like, again, just even that mental exercise, fewer resources actually unlocks more creativity.
Yeah. Totally agreed. And my lesson watching all this is that everybody feels resource constrained. Doesn't matter how they're perceived and what they have, even General Electric and Jack Welch. And you don't need to raise a bunch of money to do it. So my aerospace company, super capital intensive, never raised a dime to do that. And for all my businesses, never had to raise anything. Not saying that you shouldn't have, it's appropriate, but never had to do any of it. And it's all worked out incredibly well, but it was doing a whole lot more with a whole lot less. And it really was embracing the big little breakthroughs that you're talking about in there. It was just all the little things that stacked up. One of the concepts in the book, and I love it from an entrepreneurial standpoint, for some things I don't think make sense, but start before you're ready. Talk about, like, I wouldn't want my knee surgeon to start on the surgery without training, but as an entrepreneur, talk about that, because I love that as you went through that in the book.
Well, thank you. Just closing out, because I have one more quick thought on your question about fewer resources. What I'm not suggesting people do is grind it out. So it's not just like, oh, we have fewer resources, so I'm going to exert more effort. I'm going to crank more hours. That might work in a short term, but that just leads to burnout and anxiety and stress. So what I'm suggesting isn't throwing more energy at it, it's throwing more creativity at the problem, which generally yields a better result.
Well, right before we get into that, so you're pulling on another thread. It's we have to be making a little bit of progress, right? Or it feels terrible, like you're completely stuck, going through. So I think when you talk about innovation and constantly applying that, you almost can't help but make progress.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's those little steps of advance, but then it fuels your confidence, and then that creates momentum. There's no question about it. So back to your, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Start before you're ready is a principle that I deeply believe. The thing is that many times when we see an opportunity or a challenge, instead of putting ourselves in motion, we just wait. We pause. And we're waiting for ideal conditions, or maybe we're waiting for permission or some perfect plan. But I would suggest there's a real risk in waiting, and that we might lose that opportunity altogether. At best, we give up our head start. So in my opinion, a better approach, sort of put yourself in motion, even if you can't see the finish line. And you kind of navigate as you go. You find your way once you get started. And of course, I'm not saying use bad judgment. So you're a knee surgeon. I'm not saying he starts the procedure without being trained. Of course not. But if you're going after a new sales opportunity, instead of sitting back and waiting until it's perfect, your competitor is going to win the business. Sometimes you just got to put yourself in motion and then figure it out as you go. And what I've discovered is that that's actually a more pragmatic approach, because you get more cycles in, get in more reps. So let's say one company is going to wait for 6 months to launch something until it's perfect. The other company launches immediately and it's lousy. First idea stinks. But then a day later, they tweak it a little bit and it still stinks. And then a couple of days later, they make it a little bit better and it's still pretty darn bad. But by the time they get to 6 months, when that other company is just getting started, they've had 80 shots at this thing, 90 shots at it, 150 shots at it. And so each tweak, back to the refinements idea, you keep getting better and better. There's no way that that company who waited too long to launch could compete with the company that's had 150 cycles of iteration and improvement. So I just think that actually, again, in an appropriate way, I'm not saying do something inappropriate, but just by putting yourself in motion in most things, you actually get in more reps, more cycle time, more refinements, and ultimately come out better.
Yeah, and that's the way it landed on me in the book, is like, get started. You know you can get there. You don't know the path, but you know you'll figure it out along the way. So even building my aerospace business, hey, I've got this one process, we're really good at it. We want to apply it to repairing aircraft parts. I didn't know how to become an FAA repair station, but I figured out a way to write the manual and build on all of the stuff and start with 7 repairs. It ended up being over 10,000 repairs by the time I sold the business. Had I waited until all that stuff was, I mean, it never would have happened. It just wouldn't have. So maybe there's something there you could speak to, which is, how do you get to a place where you trust your ability to work through that kind of struggle to come out the other side?
Yeah, excellent question. And again, getting back to music for a second, people ask me all the time. I'm playing some jazz performance, and as you know, jazz is a very complex form of music. It's fast. It requires physical dexterity. You're often unrehearsed. You're playing with musicians you've never played with, let alone practice with. You're in front of a live audience. You're making it up as you go. And the question I always get is, how do you know you're going to get it right? I always laugh and say, I know I'm not going to get it right. Never have, never will. I've played 1,000+ concerts around the world. I've never gotten it right. So my confidence as a musician isn't thinking you're going to be perfect. It's not thinking you're going to always get it right. It's knowing how to recover. So if I get off, which I will, I can find my way back. Like I can figure out, I can bounce back. And I think that applies way beyond music. That confidence isn't expecting to be perfect, isn't expecting you're going to get everything right. It's you get confident when you know how to recover. And so the idea is you can get confident with enough cycles. You're like, okay, I screwed this up, but I got back on track. I screwed that up, but I got back on track. It's the act of getting yourself back on track, not perfectionism, that builds confidence. And you do that a few times, you start to have a lot of confidence. And not that you're going to be perfect, not that you won't make a mistake, because you will. But it's knowing that I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to recover.
Yeah. And you have to do it enough times to go, okay, it works, right? And then finally actually believe it and trust that whole thing, coming through. Yeah, I think that's a big one. And that goes to the fear thing that you were talking about that holds us back. I had a friend on my podcast recently, and he was using the metaphor of Sherpas taking gear up to base camp at Mount Everest, and they would typically carry over 90% of their body weight. And amazing, just incredible. And then he applied it to leadership, and he wrote a book, and I think it was just a quick epiphany in the book, but it was my biggest takeaway from the entire book, which is when you look at power to weight ratio for leadership, power is your leadership capability and the weight is your negative self-talk, however it comes in going through. So I think this fear is what holds us back from embracing some of the things that you're talking about here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And by the way, that confidence isn't only the big wins. I mean, I got to imagine you've had a number of remarkable, world-changing top 0.001% wins, but I got to believe that you weren't unconfident the day before and only confident thereafter. It's those micro wins that you had over the years. You had a problem, didn't go the way you wanted, you figure out how to recover. You get a little bit of confidence. Like you put a penny in that confidence bank account, and then all of a sudden you do something else. You put a nickel in the account, you put a quarter in the account. But over time, you start to build confidence. You don't need to have a giant win to become confident. It's lots of little ones, just like we're talking about big little breakthroughs, lots of little innovations along the way.
Yeah. And that's true. I mean, at 6 years old, I'm pulling weeds for a quarter an hour, a lot of money back then. Well, that was really neat. And now how can I do more? And then it's shoveling snow. And I call this value creation cycle, struggle to get a capability, build self-confidence, use it to create value, and take a bigger step the next time. So everything just feels normal as I go through it. So this is almost a 60-year value creation journey for me to walk through. It's my 60-year overnight success story, I guess, to go through. Some people think things just happen, but they don't. They really don't. Okay, so one of the cool things in the book, reach for weird, and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is out of the box and be memorable. Talk about that concept. Loved it.
Yeah, I was covering these sort of 8 core fundamental mindsets that everyday innovators have and that we can as leaders kind of inject into our teams. And this notion here is really around seeking the unexpected. It's not just doing the tried and true or the obvious, but when you're faced with a challenge or an opportunity, push your creative boundaries a bit. Find something that's a bit odd or unorthodox that ultimately may carry the day. One example, I just heard about this. I thought it was pretty cool. There's a company called Cloudflare, which is a big cybersecurity company, and they protect over 10% of the global internet traffic every day. So if you're a cybersecurity firm, you need to have an encryption key. An encryption key is, well, as you might sound, is like the key to the castle. If the key is broken, you have no security. So that if you're a cybersecurity firm protecting 10% of the world's traffic, like you better have a pretty good encryption key. Well, the thing is that encryption keys are basically written by computers. It's an algorithm. However, by every definition, an algorithm in some way or another can be cracked because it's formulaic. So what's this reach for weird approach? Cloudflare did something completely unexpected to build their encryption key. They turned to lava lamps. Lava lamps, I guess, originated in the 70s, and they're these weird blobby amorphous things that are never in the same place, they're always different. So in Cloudflare's global headquarters, they have this huge wall with over 100 lava lamps on the wall. Each one has a digital camera aimed at the lava lamp, which snaps a random picture at random times, converts that into digital code, which powers their encryption key. So if you think, oh, how do I create the most secure cybersecurity? You think, well, I better have a better algorithm. They went to lava lamps, which is a completely unheard of, weird, oddball approach. And it's been heralded as the most secure internet security on the planet. So again, reaching for weird can be fun, but it's really challenging ourselves to look for those unexpected approaches because they may yield a far better outcome.
That's incredible. How are you going to replicate that? And I did have a lava lamp, by the way, because 70s were a big deal for me.
They're coming back. Lava lamps are coming back.
That's great. And then there's, I guess, in the 8, there was the break it to fix it. Now, how do you do that in a productive way to where it's just not complete chaos? But what's the most productive way to apply that concept?
There are some old business chestnuts that are valuable and some that are not. And the one that really gets me the worst is when people say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't know who invented that. That is terrible advice. Awful. Like we should immediately remove that from our vocabulary, all of us. That's a bad thing to say. Because what are you saying? You're saying I'm waiting till a system or a process is broken before getting on with an upgrade. That's downright irresponsible. Back to your knee surgeon. You don't want your knee surgeon doing that. Like, no way. You don't want something broken before getting on with an upgrade. So I think our responsibility as leaders is to think about how can I examine things that might look fine on the surface and deconstruct them and make them better. It's sort of this ongoing and perpetual act of reinvention and rethinking and reimagining things instead of just taking them for face value. Because if we lived in a vacuum, something might persist. But today the world is changing at a rate like none other in history. So I think what our job is to think about, okay, something looks good. How do I make it better? How do I upgrade it? How do I improve it? And those can be big ones, big improvements, but they can be back to the idea of big little breakthroughs, little micro ones. What could you do to make your product or service 1% better? If you have a sales process, what could you do to add a 0.02% boost to your monthly output? So it's, again, looking for little windows of opportunity, but on a high frequency basis.
Yeah. And this was my takeaway from reading the book I talk about at the beginning of our discussion here. It's so obvious in front of everyone, but almost nobody actually sees it. I mean, what percentage of teams that you start working with are approaching things this way, in this continuous improvement mindset?
Not as high as you'd hope, maybe 20%. And they're not bad people, by the way. They're smart, wonderful, amazing people. But we have that kind of vibe, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the other big blocker there, back to fear, is we mistakenly believe that trying something new is risky and standing still is not risky. And I think we tend to overestimate the risk of trying something new, but we underestimate the risk of standing still. Like, how's that working for Oldsmobile? How's Pan Am Airlines doing these days? So I think that we have a responsibility. Don't wait until something is broken or totally screwed up. It's that proactive nature of reinventing and reimagining. It's funny, as I was building my own companies, I've had this phrase. I've repeated it so often. My folks roll their eyes at me, and I don't care. I keep saying it, which is that someday a company will come along and put us out of business. So it might as well be us. That's that vibe. It's like, okay, spike the ball, enjoy the win, but then what's the next thing? How do you keep upgrading as opposed to becoming stagnant or complacent?
Yeah, I love that. Even if you're on the right track, you sit there long enough, you're going to get run over. So you gotta keep moving. In the work you're doing today, you've trademarked kind of a framework of leadership development called Find a Way. What are the elements of that for our listeners?
It's a basic philosophy that any problem can be solved, any opportunity can be seized. And so instead of saying, oh, okay, that can't be done, it's like, well, let's figure out a way to do it. And it gets back to much of what we talked about today, Lee, which is that entrepreneurial mindset, someone who's going to go after tough problems and navigate uncertainty and try a bunch of experiments and refinements and figure things out. It's not find the way, it's find a way, meaning that any one of us might find our own way, which is totally good. That's even better. And if you really double click on it, I kind of think of it as the intersection of ingenuity and resolve. It's the willingness to be creative and try new things and tinker, coupled with an unwavering belief that you're going to drive the desired outcome. So you put those things together, it's sort of like creative tenacity. You just become unstoppable. And that's what I tried to do is create a systematic approach for leaders and individuals to say there's things that we crave. Maybe it's top line growth. Maybe it's better outcomes in our family. Maybe it's helping our community. Whatever those things are, how do you get that? Well, you find a way. And it's ingenuity and resolve. Ultimately, those ways start to become fairly visible.
Yeah, makes total sense. As part of the work that I do, I lead masterminds of CEOs that want to increase the value of their businesses. And early on in some of the groups, leaders will say things like, well, this is it. This is the way. This will create the most value. And I always back up and say, well, my perspective has completely changed to where I say, this is the way I can think of today, the best thing I can think of to create the most value, but I know there's a better way. I just haven't thought of it yet, and it's my job to go find it.
Yeah. And again, if you say this is the way, that's implying that there's a universal right way and everything else is wrong. And you look at innovation since the beginning of time, societies have changed. It wasn't that the previous idea was terrible. It's that they found a new and better way. And so I think that when you say find the way, there's like a fixed mindset. There's only a way, a single way to do it, as opposed to find a way, which is more of an abundance mindset. There may be infinite possibilities that are always changing and evolving. And the best way to do it today might be very different than it is 6 months from now.
Yeah. Yeah, and the one of the 8 elements that you were referring to earlier, the fall 7 times, stand up 8. You just keep going. There's something that's really a superpower for entrepreneurs that are successful. They can just keep getting up. It's amazing. How do people develop that?
So first of all, that phrase, I didn't write the phrase, just to be clear. I borrowed it from a Japanese proverb. The reason why is that my observation of the most successful value creators and innovators and entrepreneurs is that it's actually two insights. First of all, they don't look at failure the same way. So if you try something and it doesn't work perfectly the first time, most people are gutted, humiliated, ashamed. They want to go hide in a corner. As opposed to the other way of thinking about it is, that's interesting. What did I learn from it? What's the data telling me? And so the best innovators kind of remove judgment. Not that setbacks don't sting. No one wants to aim for failure. Of course not. But it's more like, okay, that's part of the process. I'm going to have to tolerate some of those along the way. And how can I quickly learn from that? Think of it as a failed experiment, not a failed human. And then it's when you do get back up, because there is an element of perseverance, it's not doing the same thing again and again. So it's not just dogged persistence. It's like, okay, I'm going to be persistent, but now I'm going to get back up and try something a little different. So each attempt is an adjustment. So think about that again, creativity fused with tenacity. You're getting back up, but you're trying a little something different. And enough tinkering with persistence, eventually you crack the code. And that's been my experience personally, and I've witnessed this dozens of times all over the world.
Yeah, that's great. And where does discipline play into that? Because you really point to that a few times in the book as well.
Yeah, I think there's competing forces that sometimes really aren't in conflict with each other. It's funny, the first book I wrote was called Disciplined Dreaming. And you might think those are radically, opposing ideas, but they can work in harmony. That can be a bit of a yin and yang. And to me, that's both those elements are required to be an innovator and to create value. If you are all discipline and no dreaming, you're sort of a bureaucratic, rule-following swamp. If you're all creativity and no discipline, you're scattering all over the place, but there's no follow through, or you don't actually get anything done. There's no executional capacity. And so to me, as great leaders, it's having both sides of that equation, having the room and the flexibility to be creative and use ingenuity and inventive thinking, coupled with the rigor and discipline that any great leader would bring. And so you get the right mix there. Again, that's where I've seen just, the fireworks really start to hit.
No, that's great. So I purchased the ebook, and then when I found out you had guitar jazz passages between the sections, I got the audiobooks. I listened to the audiobook. So your next book, my only request is I want a longer segment of playing between. And when I wrote my first book, Your Most Important Number, at the end of narrating it over 2 days, including interviews after each chapter, I picked up the guitar, just did an impromptu 3 to 4 minute solo, and stuck it at the end of the book. And that's how I can tell if people made it all the way through. But I love that, by the way. It was so cool. And from our discussion, if you have one, what was your biggest takeaway from our discussion today?
Well, I guess a couple observations. One is I love how you were living these principles. I feel like you are embodying many principles I talked about in the book in a really natural way, where your own creativity is flowing, the way that you're helping others create value in the world, and you're doing it with a spirit of kindness and generosity, which, sort of you see someone that you that has the characteristics that you admire most, you can instantly spot them. And so I see that in you, and I just want to celebrate and admire that. And I think that the idea here is that value can be created in lots of ways. There's not the way, it's a way. And through our own creativity, each of us has infinite possibilities, infinite ideas, and infinite ways to create value. It doesn't have to be putting on a hoodie and starting a tech company. It doesn't have to be an aerospace tycoon. It can be what feels right to you. But I do think there's value for all of us to create. And I can't get too speculative on the purpose of life. Although if you were, one might say part of your role as being on this planet is to create value of some kind. Maybe it's a better way to be a parent. Maybe it's a better way to do a garden. Maybe it's a better way to build and sell an aerospace company. But I think there's an element of a calling to it that, if we can bring our creativity forward and make the world a better place and benefit personally too, that's a life well lived. And Lee, I think you're an excellent example of doing just that.
Oh, thank you. And I'm 100% in line with everything you just said. That was so well said. Josh, if our listeners want to learn more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, thank you so much. My website's just joshlinkner.com, joshlinkner.com. If you'd like to learn about our venture fund, it's called Mudita Venture Partners, MUDITA VP.com, Mudita VP. Just since I said it, now I got to explain it. Mudita is a weird term, but one that we've been chatting about all day, really, Lee, because Mudita is a Sanskrit term, which means taking joy in other people's success. It's that feeling you get when your best friend gets a promotion or your kid gets an A. And I feel that with you. Like, hearing about your success fills me with mudita. And I've observed that the most creative, the best, most impactful people, actually, that's something that they really value, which is why we chose to name our venture fund Moody.
Love it. And you've certainly elevated my emotional energy today. So thank you for that value. And for our listeners, this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and leave a review. And until next time, show the world your value.